The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to Ethical Corporation's webinar on business innovation. Over the next 45 minutes, we will be discussing the extent to which three top European brands, McCain Foods, Royal BAM Group, and Jaguar Land Rover, are number one, evolving their business to create a circular economy, number two, the benefits of their approach, and number three, what this means for their strategy to embed sustainability into their business. My name is Krina Amin, and I'm a project director here at Ethical Corporation, and I'll be moderating the discussion today. With us today, we have Francois Tasmowski, who is Head of Corporate Social Responsibility Europe at McCain Foods, with a particular focus on how to develop strategies to leverage corporate responsibility as a driver of innovation, differentiation, and competitive advantage. We also have with us today William van Niekerk, who has been working in the construction industry for over 20 years. He is responsible for corporate social responsibility at Royal BAM Group since 2012, after being a director at several operation companies within BAM. And lastly, we have Ian Ellison, who manages sustainability within product development at Jaguar Land Rover, where life cycle assessment and natural capital valuation have led to innovations in closed-loop aluminium, heralding JLR's circular economy approach. Thank you all for joining. To give you an understanding of today's structure, there are no slides, it's pure discussion. The webinar will be a focused discussion with the speakers, trying to bring as much out of their expertise and knowledge from their backgrounds and the work they've done. We'll have 3 polling questions in the webinar, which we will put to you, the audience, and our speakers will then bring in their perspectives and responses to the questions. The latter half will involve a Q&A with the audience, where you, the audience, can pitch your questions directly to the speakers. Now, before we begin, I'd like to emphasize that this is an interactive discussion. On the right-hand side, you will see a box where you can post your questions. You can also post questions on Twitter via the hashtag RBS15, so please do get involved. We will now begin the webinar and discussion. We will start off with a poll question to our audience. What is the main driver for sustainable innovation? A, reputational concerns, B, cost efficiency, C, carbon reduction, D, consumer engagement, and E, business resilience. The poll will close in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Interesting results from the polling. 42% of our audience believe that business resilience is the main driver for sustainable innovation. Francois, let's ask you this. Why do you think it's important for your business to take sustainable innovation seriously as a business priority?
Yes, Krina, thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Francois Tasmowski, and I must say I resonate completely with the answer of the poll about business resilience. So let me say a few words about McCain to go further on that question. McCain is really a company that is anchored in the agriculture reality. We are a Canadian family-owned company that was created 60 years ago by 2 sons of potato growers, and that felt the volatility of the potato crop was such a big issue that they had to stabilize this by freezing the potato and transforming it into a value-added product that they could commercialize. And of course, over the period of 60 years, McCain grew to become a multinational organization that has today around $6 billion of revenue, 50 factories, 15,000 employees, and around 4,500 grower partners. But it's still a family-owned company. And I stress that out because it's very important from a people and culture perspective. Now, one key trend or one key reality within our business, we are a food business that is driving the whole sustainable innovation debate, is that we face in the next 15 years, with a horizon of 2030, an increasing demand for food of 50%, which automatically also leads to an increased demand for water of 30% and an increased demand for energy of 50%. Now, this increasing demand happens within a context of climate change, meaning increasing volatility and increasing extremes. When I say extremes, I mean floods and droughts, which of course for us in agriculture has a major impact. So we are a single product company, mostly potato-based. So we have this reality of climate change. We have this increasing competition for agricultural land. Agricultural land is increasingly becoming scarce. We have an increasing population that needs to be fed, and we have an increasing strain on natural resources and thus higher environmental expectations. So that is a real challenge from a business resilience perspective, because we of course depend on the raw material. Now, producing more is part of the solution, but is definitely not the solution. The solution is much more holistic and needs to integrate and include different solutions. Because at the same time where you have this climate change and increasing demand on food, at the same time you have the big issue, growing issue of food waste. Because food waste today represents about 30% of everything which is produced in the food chain. Only in Europe, this represents 90 million tons of food wasted per year. So we don't only have to produce more, but we have to produce better, and we have to tackle food waste. So this is for us the nexus that is really driving us towards sustainable innovation. And later I will be more concrete on different examples that we're using to actually tackle this paradox.
Excellent. Thank you, Francois, for that. That's really interesting, that climate change and business resilience for McCain Foods are the biggest drivers for sustainable innovation. Now let's bring William into the conversation. William, I'd like to hear from you whether you agree with our audience about business resilience being the main driver for sustainable innovation. How does it look at Royal BAM Group?
Thanks. My name is William van Niekerk. I represent Royal BAM Group and I'm Director of CSR. Royal BAM Group operates in 5 European countries and outside Europe, and we basically do infrastructure and buildings, PPP projects and real estate development. And in that business, there's 2 types of innovation that are crucial. On the one hand, there's of course our process improvements, which we must do time and time again with the supply chain partners. And on the other hand, there's the products that we make. And our products, for instance, can be energy neutral rather than energy consumption, which is an innovation in itself. So I looked at this chart and I thought that cost efficiency may be explained 2 ways. It's the cost of our own production process, but it's also the life cycle cost of the things we make, which we should reduce. And in that respect, if we do that properly, yes, then I would agree that that would make our business more resilient. And I agree with the audience that that's important. But I would also like to agree with the audience that effectively all the items are more or less important here. And yes, I do think that if we combine cost efficiency and business resilience, we basically serve both drivers there.
Excellent. Thank you, William, for those insights. Now, Ian, I'd like to hear from you. What are the biggest drivers for sustainable innovation at JLR, and what is it achieving?
Well, yes, good to be online. Thanks for the opportunity to talk here. For us in our sector in automotive, and particularly in what we call premium automotive, I would, on the face of it, slightly disagree with the voting here that carbon reduction is overwhelmingly important. I mean, the use of fossil fuel energy and the carbon dioxide produced from that is, by any measure, overwhelmingly the biggest impact we have and the biggest challenge we have. But having said that, I think the reason for having slightly different priorities, I probably also disagree with the question in that it's framed as a zero-sum game. And really what's driving innovation for us is we need all of these things addressed. So the innovation for us is to try and bring all of these things home. So it starts with reducing carbon reduction because that's measurably our biggest impact. But we're trying to do that by looking at the whole set of impacts, by doing life cycle analysis, by doing environmental footprinting, by doing environmental profit and loss, and really understanding what's coming down the road. So in the first instance, by conventional vehicles where they're driven by petrol or diesel, we're making more efficient engines. We've opened a new small high-efficiency engine factory recently in Wolverhampton to create new engines, which we haven't been doing in the past. We bought our engines from other places because of our ownership structure. We're trying to improve the vehicle in terms of aerodynamics, particularly in terms of weight. As we do that, we've brought down the carbon emissions per kilometre of our vehicles on average fairly dramatically, and accordingly improved the fuel efficiency. But from my point of view as a sustainability professional, what you start to notice as a result of that is that there's a risk of shifting the burden away from the tailpipe emissions and ending up with embedded carbon. For example, aluminium is a lot more energy intensive and a lot more carbon intensive than steel. So if you produce lightweight by a shift from steel to aluminium, you embed more carbon. And as you shift more into efficient powertrains such as hybrids and electric vehicles and so on, you've got a more complicated vehicle with batteries and electronics and copper wires and things in which again reduces your carbon footprint, which is the biggest priority, but somewhat at the expense of other factors in the life cycle assessment. So what I and my team do is look forward to our product development process and the technologies we're using to address tailpipe carbon and try and manage the entire life cycle footprint down. So by taking that whole system, whole life, all factors, making sure the burden isn't just shifted from tailpipe to other things, then we then force back into the business innovations which are create a reducing footprint for our business whilst we also grow it profitably.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Ian. And it sort of nicely moved on to our next question around technology and looking at a circular economy. The next question we're going to ask our listeners today is, what is required to make a circular economy a reality? Is it A, government support, B, business leadership, C, consumer awareness, D, mandatory legislative initiatives, or E, voluntary international legislative initiatives? The poll will close in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Interesting results here. We have the majority of our audience, 46%, that believe business leadership is what is required to make a circular economy a reality. Now, William, let's ask you, what do you think of those results? Do they resonate with what Royal BAM thinks?
Well, I appreciate the audience opinion that business leadership is required. I think the business community is capable of organizing the supply chain. And it's in the supply chain that we're going to move towards a circular economy, both from the upstream and the downstream side of the materials we use. So, yes, I very much agree here. I also would think that we need larger customers for a circular economy. And the experience that our company has so far is that when a local government, for instance, moves towards circular housing, it can provide an excellent field lab for circular economy initiatives. There's lots to learn, and we did learn a lot about this, and we really appreciate not the financial support in this case of the government, but the opportunity to launch a new way of looking at supply chains and a new way of cherishing the materials we have.
Excellent. And on that note, William, you're doing some great work on retrofits to create zero energy for homes. What's been sort of the biggest challenge in setting such a strategy?
That's an interesting question. The retrofitting we did basically was based on taking the energy bill of the people living in the house, saying we're going to use that money not for energy anymore, but we're going to use it for construction, because we think that you're probably going to spend more on energy in the years to come than you would on a retrofit. So where there were two money streams previously, part of the money went to the landlord, part to the energy company. We said, how can we redirect those money streams to one party, being the landlord, and how can we convince the landlord to invest in its property to make it more valuable and to have more securities on the property. So we had to convince the landlord of the importance of investing in sustainable housing. And we convinced them that it was a good idea to experiment on that and to create some competition with other construction companies who actually could make the most cost-effective energy-neutral home, or zero-neutral home, zero-emission home, I must say. And we did so. And, well, the next challenge, of course, will be to make it even more cost-effective than we already did. But the first challenge was to redirect the money streams that we traditionally experience and combine the stream of cost of energy and cost of living and housing to one stream to make a more optimal design for retrofit.
Excellent. Thanks, William. We actually have a question from our audience to you, William. Have Royal BAM Group looked at life cycle costing and the market for reused structural steelwork to build and create a more circular economy?
Yes, we did look at life cycle costing, and we did engage with suppliers to see which materials and which size of materials would have the most residual value. For instance, looking at timber beams, we learned from suppliers that they were willing to pay much more if we would use a little bit bigger beam than we would normally do for structural reasons. They said if you take the bigger beam, we could give you a higher value when you basically take the building down again, and we can use these materials again. So yes, we did so. We looked at that.
Excellent. Thanks so much, William. Now, Francois, I'd like to bring you back into the conversation around building a circular economy. We have a question from one of our audience members, and they're asking, have McCain Foods considered their water consumption and considered how to make it more sustainable to build a circular economy?
Yes, that's a good question. I think the three main resources that really are driving our footprint are, on the first place, of course, potatoes. The potatoes are really at the heart of our model. And then you have water and energy, which is necessary not only to grow the raw material, but as well to make the transformation happen. So if you look at the potatoes first, because that's really where the biggest impact is, today in our factory we have 100% of the potato which is being reused. So there's no food waste in our factories. We have zero food waste. Every potato that comes into the factory would either be transformed into a French fry or transformed into a byproduct like puree, for example, or transformed into biogas via biodigesters and be used as a renewable energy, or be sent back to the field as an organic fertilizer. So from the potato perspective, there's already a lot of optimization and circular thinking in place. The water side, we are having a commitment in the field of agriculture to manage water in a very responsible way. Of course, as we're talking about Europe, we call the key countries where we grow potatoes are France, UK, Netherlands, Belgium, and this is what we call the potato belt. And why this is where potatoes are grown is because there is a very humid climate. So there is a lot of rainwater which is being used in the fields, and therefore our water footprint is not in this region a major issue. However, if you look at other regions like India, for example, where the climate is much drier, we have a pilot plant in India, in Mehsana, which is basically a zero water plant. So every water that comes into the plant is being recirculated, reused, so that we can actually manage that resource responsibly. So and when you look at energy, we have, for example, in the UK, a factory in Whittlesea where we have placed windmills, and then of course we have in a lot of our factories wastewater treatment plants that are transforming the wastewater also into gas and renewable energy. So in Whittlesea you would have almost 70% of our energy which is actually renewable. So the key question is how do you actually scale up and roll out these interesting best practice stories?
Excellent. Thanks for that, Francois. Now, Ian, we have a question for you around technology, which you mentioned before about sort of looking at carbon reduction and the importance that the role plays at JLR. How do you work with technology to help develop products with higher social and environmental features?
We try to take a very systematic approach. So, as I mentioned before, we look at the entire life cycle. For every product we produce and plan to produce, we do an in-depth life cycle assessment of all the various impacts across everything that may be important. We then draw out what the most important impacts are, and then we trace those back to their root causes and try and look at that systematically. So, as I mentioned before, we've looked at lightweighting, so that improves fuel economy. That meant a shift towards aluminium, which is a high-intensity product from a carbon and energy point of view. So we spent the past few years trying to increase the circularity in the aluminium value chain. So we're up now where we can get up to 50% circularity in that, and we're aiming to get 75% by 2020 in a kind of closed loop around that value chain. And that's meant technological developments. We've needed new grades of aluminium there, and sort of looking at the sort of the pick list here, that involves some government support to do the research initially to establish those aluminium grades, which are entirely new. We then needed a lot of business leadership ourselves and in our supply chain, and a lot of that's been done from sort of first principles of knowing what's coming down the line, really, rather than responding to legislation directly. We could have just lightweighted without regard to these things before. So there was a question of doing the math and sort of looking what was coming down the line, looking at the sort of business resilience angle on that. So we've managed to close the loop on our highest impact material, and what we're doing with that same mathematics now is working our way through different value chains. So we're going through different things, plastics and steel and rubber and the things that go into electronics and batteries and so forth, to try and see where the greatest impacts are and the greatest need is, and then put together coalitions of people that can work on those value chains, which can mean our suppliers, more often means our entire supply base and some people who aren't currently in our supply base, to try and create a model of circularity which works and creates and does not destroy value in that value chain or loop. So that the innovations really, there's some technical innovations, but a lot of the innovations are really around getting people to think systemically and systematically across the whole system, and think about what impacts they have and how they can avoid those impacts and create value and not increase costs and so forth. In our particular sector, it's not customer driven. We're not selling to people who are necessarily banging our door down asking for these kinds of things, but through taxation and legislation and so forth, they'll experience costs of these things. And when you ask them, by and large, there's kind of an unspoken contract. They expect us to deal with these things, as their supplier, kind of thing. So we have to think ahead and then be able to demonstrate to our customers they're not necessarily making product selections based on these criteria. But the criteria are easy enough to work out through say, systematic approach of life cycle assessment, environmental impact assessment, then prioritising and then collaborating to create circularity.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Ian. I mean, on that note of looking at creating a bigger positive change and looking at the bigger picture, do you actually agree with the results of the poll?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think, as I say, consumer awareness in our particular sector, and I could see that varying a lot from sector to sector. In our sector, consumer awareness is not really required nor a major driver. We certainly need a lot of business leadership, and most of the effort that we've had is really changing minds and paradigms and models, and sort of getting people to think on a much bigger canvas than the sort of normal reductionist sort of transaction processing basis, which is how automotive has grown up over the past 100 years. We do need a little bit of government support to seed things, and the CO2 tailpipe thing is very, very heavily driven by legislation, and then that sort of then creates the need to innovate, to avoid burdens being shifted into embedded carbon and so forth. I think the voluntary legislative initiatives, certainly in our sector, haven't driven very much at all. I say that you do get people, and I'm blessed with a lot of people around me who are passionate about these issues, so they're driving them through, but it's not so much, they volunteer to do that, but as a sector, we're doing it because it's in our business interests to look at these things rather than any other driver in that way.
Excellent. Thanks, Ian. Let's quickly go back to Francois and ask him about his comments on the results of the polls. Francois, what do you think?
Yes, thank you, Karina. I think it's a very critical question, and I would like to offer to the audience a thought about leadership, because I think you don't need a title to be a leader. When you talk about business leadership, typically everybody thinks about the top-down type of leadership, which of course is a necessary piece of the puzzle to catalyze the movement and really start the dynamic. But the bottom-up leadership, the bottom-up engagement of the employees to become leaders and show and illustrate how they can make a difference in their own sphere of influence at every level of their organization is really also a major driver of innovation. And to enable that, I think there's a new narrative that is needed, a new storytelling about not only about the business value of circular economy and sustainability, but also about competitiveness, about brand equity. And one of the key challenges in engaging employees is really identifying this small percentage of people that actually resonate with that topic. Because in a broad employee population, you will probably find, just to put a number, 5%, maybe 10% of people that really drive on this topic and that really want to make a difference and that want to add meaning to their job and that really want to become actors rather than spectators. And identifying these people, once you have identified these people, and you engage them into a conversation at their local site, in their local country, within their local function, and ask them to generate ideas and then create the conditions for them to actually manifest these ideas and give them the necessary resources to do something concrete, and then, of course, provide them the visibility and the recognition once they've done something concrete. It's a major driver for positive change and for innovation.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Francois. On that note of a top-down and bottom-up approach, let's move on to the next question. This is our last poll question to the listeners. Should sustainable business innovation be a top-down or a bottom-up approach? You have three choices here. The first one is top-down, the second is bottom-up, the third is a bit of both. The poll will close in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Interesting. A huge number, 87% of our audience believe it should be a bit of both, so mixed views over here. Ian, let's ask you, which approach do you think works best?
In a perfect world, it would be top-down. You'd have leaders who get all of the issues and what they mean and how to interpret them in their business and their sector and so forth. But I mean, a lot of the issues we're dealing with here are emergent, they're relatively new, they weren't taught in business schools when the current crop of leaders were necessarily going through. So I think it's a little bit optimistic to expect every CEO to be sort of driving it down through every business in every sector. Having said that, the sort of mathematics of planetary science and the various other issues that we've got here create an imperative. So and I think people are aware of that. And I agree with Francois. I think often this stuff is driven through by small groups of people who are not necessarily at the top. It certainly helps if they are, but it is groups of people who understand the issues, who really care about the issues, and want to make a difference. And that makes the kind of work I do sort of exciting and frustrating in equal measure, because you're trying to bring about what is potentially quite an enormous and really important change, and you're trying to bring along many different groups of stakeholders that variously get it and often don't quite get it like you get it. So it is a really big challenge. It doesn't really matter to me where the change comes from as long as it comes. It helps to have it top down. The thing you really need is in-depth understanding and people who are passionate enough to sort of carry the change and to communicate that change to other people, because it's about as much about empathy as anything. It's about engaging people in their own terms as to why it might be in their interest to engage with this subject and change their behaviours and their expectations, because there's a lot of change required and it's rather complicated, and most people are not up for trying to understand the entire problem. So you have to break it down into easily understandable pieces, talk to people in their own terms, and bring them along.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Ian. William, what works at Royal BAM Group in terms of innovation being a top-down or bottom-up approach?
Well, I think, like the audience, it's a bit of both. Obviously, much of our innovation are really close to our customers. Our customer needs change, and there we find new ways. We did a small survey and showed that practically all of our innovations were at the project size that we do, where people are really clever and innovative in finding new solutions. But our leadership is also important. Of course, we must, as leaders, stress the importance of looking for new ways. We must give room for experimentations. We must alert everybody continuously that if you stop innovating, you will be lost in competition because others do innovate. So in leadership terms, yes, from the top, there must be a continuous alert to everybody to not stand still and keep on innovating. Does it work for BAM? I think it does. Does it give world-shocking breakthrough every time again? Probably not. But do we feel that we win competition by innovation? Yes, we do.
Excellent. That's really interesting, for, William, that you mentioned that you win competition by innovation. On that note, do you have any tips for our audience where companies are actually starting to think more about sustainability, innovation, and using it as a competitive advantage?
Yeah, my tip would be that you always consider who your stakeholders are. Most of us look at our own business and try to think of how we can innovate our processes. And probably we're all very good at it. I heard some good examples of the other speakers there. That's our obligation, I would say, towards our customers. Our customers are looking for benefits for them as well, and so do our supply chain partners. And we did a little survey through our supply chain on what our contribution in value creation was for our suppliers. And we learned that our suppliers, for instance, were putting more safety in their jobs. And second, our suppliers said that their processes were re-innovated through working with us. And that was really important to us because 75% of our turnover is generated by supply chain partners. So if we can somehow encourage sustainable innovation at our suppliers, it probably comes back to us and we can transfer it to our clients. So my tip would be that if you look at innovation, you should consider not only your own primary process, but also the other stakeholders to be more effective in delivering a more sustainable product at the end of the day.
Excellent. Thanks for that, William. Francois, I'd like to bring you back into the conversation. In terms of sustainability, business innovation being a top-down or bottom-up approach, what are the key advantages of your own approach at McCain Foods?
Yes, you know what they say is that culture always beats strategy, and I think that's really the reality at McCain. McCain, as I said in the introduction, is a family-owned company, and that family spirit and that entrepreneurial spirit you will find it's in our DNA, and it's everywhere in our company. We have a very high level of employee loyalty, on average about 15 years of service on average, and a very low turnover, around 3% of employee turnover. So that strong culture is definitely an advantage, because ultimately transformation towards sustainable business is a journey, and transformation towards sustainable business is about people and is about culture. Talking about transforming a corporation is interesting from a theoretical perspective, but practically it's all about people. It's all about mobilizing individuals, mobilizing and engaging people to do something differently, and ultimately help them shift a little bit in their mindset towards realizing that creating value should not only be about economic value, but it can also be about environmental and social value. And I would actually offer the audience another thought on that. Is I think we need to add a fourth P to the famous triple P equation. We need to add the P of pleasure. So it's people, profit, planet, and pleasure, because the pleasure aspect, the desirability of sustainability and sustainable innovation is so fundamental to the success of this. And once people start seeing that sustainability and sustainable innovation is actually a fantastic tool to really create value, they will get motivated, and then through motivated people there will be best practice examples and great pilot projects that will emerge. And then once these best practice examples become rolled out and scaled up, that can really make a breakthrough in terms of transformation.
Excellent, Francois. I love that, the new sort of 4 Ps, the people, planet, profit, and pleasure. It seems to be sort of a great hashtag going forward. I mean, in terms of where you're actually looking at next, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, well, as I mentioned, I think the key challenge at McCain, and I would actually dare to say that it's the key challenge for our society and all of us as corporations, is really how do you scale things up, and how do you roll out best practices, because the good ideas are there and the technology is there, and of course we are evolving, and as we evolve, new technologies will emerge and new breakthroughs, innovations will emerge. But there's already a lot of great things existing, but that is not necessarily applied at scale. And so at McCain, I think in Europe we are clearly the lead region in terms of driving the sustainability agenda, also because of the socioeconomic context, and because the European Commission and all of our stakeholders across the value chain are advanced on this topic. But I think if you look at emerging countries and other regions, I'm thinking China, India, Africa, but also partly in some ways the US, there are still ways to progress and to apply some good practices from Europe across different regions. So that is really one of the key next steps for McCain Foods.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Francois. Going back to the 4 Ps, people, planet, profit, and pleasure, I'd like to ask William for some of his practical examples of pleasure in sustainable innovation.
What we learned is that indeed people do not buy sustainability. Some say green is for geeks. What we learned with retrofitting the houses is that the people that were really interested they were happy about other things than sustainability. They learned when the gas meter was removed, they had an extra cupboard. When the retrofit and the facade was really over the existing facade, they could use more room in their living room because they had actually widened rooms. And when they came into the kitchen, they couldn't cook with gas anymore, but they got this new set of pots from IKEA, which they really appreciated. And then they learned that through insulation of the house, they didn't hear the neighbors anymore. And then through new ventilation, the air quality went up. And that was all about pleasure, of course. The IKEA pots were much more important than any technicalities on insulation material or solar panels, if you like. So yes, the buy-in from the people we innovate for is much more through the pleasure than through anything else, I think.
Excellent. Brilliant. And lastly, Ian, do you have any sort of further thoughts on those 4 Ps?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with what Francois was saying. You know, the need for an entrepreneurial spirit is absolutely key. I think we're blessed with several hundred young graduates that come in each year who all want to join a business to try and make a difference. This is a space that you can really make a difference. Being a business as usual isn't good enough, so you have to come in and work out how to change things. And so there's a really interesting career challenge for people who are up for it to try and engage with this and make a difference from what starts out to be quite a low point in the organisation. But because these things are definitely needed and they need fresh eyes and a fresh view, then there's a real opportunity to create some career value out of it individually there. And in terms of the creating pleasure, I think if you're not pleasing people, it's going to be very hard to engage. So again, you're going through stakeholders, whether it's creating career opportunities for people who want to make a difference, whether it's creating, in our case, driving opportunities for people who want particular driving experiences in a world that might say that's no longer possible because of fossil fuel limitations and carbon constraints. Can you carry on enjoying motoring in a way that's sustainable? Again, that's something that people enjoy, and if you can find a way forward on that and open people's minds to what might be possible through technological innovation, then you engage people, you draw funds into a level of innovation that might close some of the gaps that we face in this space. So absolutely, it should be fun, it should be rewarding. It's not to say it will be easy, but then often the real big satisfactions don't come from things that are easy. It's taking on big challenges, and there's certainly some big challenges here. One thing I'd underline as well on top of the innovation side is and creating pilots and that will scale is the need for speed. And again, when we've looked at our aluminium supply chain, it kind of ticks all the boxes of innovation and creating pleasure and value and so on. But it took a long time. I think one of the things we've tried to do with that, we've been working with a project team at Cambridge University, the Institute for Sustainability Leadership, to say how can we dramatically reduce the amount of time it takes to close the loop there. And again, that's about changing hearts and minds, which is a fundamentally human activity rather than a technical one.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Ian. Thanks, everyone, to Ian, Francois, and William. It's been an excellent discussion, and I'm afraid time has run out. Everyone who signed up to the webinar will receive a recording of today's webinar. If your questions weren't answered, you can raise this directly with William, Francois, and Ian, along with 40 leading industry figures who will be joining us at the 14th Responsible Business Summit, taking place on the 18th and 19th of May in London, and via our hashtag RBS15. So please visit www.ethicalcorp.com/RBS for the full speaker lineup and agenda. Thanks again, everyone, and hope you enjoyed today's discussion.